Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we are diving deep into the kitchen to figure out the science that separates the two major families of bread. Trust me, by the end of this, you'll see exactly why your banana bread and your favorite baguette are just worlds apart. All right, let's just jump right in with a question that you've probably thought about before. Why is a fluffy, tender muffin so incredibly different from a chewy, crusty baguette? I mean, they both start with pretty much the same stuff, flour, some liquid, a leavener, but the results couldn't be more distinct. Well, the answer is pretty fascinating, and it all comes down to a little bit of chemistry and a whole lot of technique. So let's meet our two contenders. On one side, you've got your yeast breads. You know them, that slow, patient rise, that amazing, chewy and elastic bite, and of course, that perfect crispy crust. And then on the other side, you have quick breads, which are basically the polar opposite. They rise fast, the texture is super tender and crumbly, and the crust is soft. None of this is an accident, by the way. It's all the result of two totally different game plans.
So what is the big secret here? What creates such a huge difference? Well, it all starts with one single concept: leavening. And that's just a fancy word for how the bread gets its lift, its airiness. And the type of leavening you choose, well, that changes absolutely everything that comes after.
Okay, first up, let's talk about yeast. And here's the thing you absolutely have to remember. Yeast is alive. It's this tiny, living organism. And when you add it to your dough, it kicks off this slow, biological process called fermentation. It's literally eating the sugars in the flour, and as it does that, it burps out the carbon dioxide gas that makes your bread rise.
And this whole process is exactly why yeast breads take so darn long to make. This isn't some instant thing. That yeast needs time to kind of wake up, start munching on those sugars, and then slowly, patiently release all those little bubbles of CO2 gas into the dough. We're talking anywhere from 1 to 3 hours, or sometimes even days if you're working with something like a sourdough starter.
Now, on the complete other side of the baking world, we have chemical leaveners. Think baking soda and baking powder. Unlike our living, breathing yeast, these are just simple chemicals. Their magic comes from a super fast, really predictable reaction with an acid and a liquid. That reaction also creates carbon dioxide gas, but, and this is the key, it does it pretty much instantly.
And that right there is the game changer. There's no waiting around for a living thing to do its job. The second you mix your wet and dry ingredients together, that chemical reaction fires up and bubbles start forming immediately. This is exactly why we call them quick breads. The rise happens right now, which makes the whole process so much shorter.
Okay, so this huge difference in leavening, slow and biological versus fast and chemical, it creates another major fork in the road. It leads to a totally different goal for the dough itself. It all boils down to what I like to call the gluten question. Do you want to build it up, or do you want to avoid it at all costs?
For yeast breads, because that gas is being produced so slowly over hours, you need a container for it, right? And that's where gluten comes in. The whole goal is to develop a really strong, stretchy network of gluten proteins. Think of it like creating thousands of tiny, microscopic balloons inside your dough that can trap that CO2 and let the bread rise beautifully without falling flat.
And this isn't just some happy accident, It's totally intentional. As our source material says, in yeast breads, gluten is purposely developed to create the structural characteristic. So that signature chewy texture of a fantastic piece of bread, yeah, that's the gluten network you worked so hard to build.
But for quick breads, it is the complete opposite philosophy. Since the leavening happens in a flash, you just don't need a strong structure to hold in all that gas. In fact, developing gluten is the enemy here. It would make your muffins tough, your banana bread rubbery. The whole idea is to handle the batter as little as humanly possible.
So this all leads us to what you actually do in the kitchen. How do you go about building that strong gluten network, or, on the flip side, carefully avoiding it? Well, it's a tale of two totally different mixing methods.
To get that strong, elastic gluten for yeast bread, you've got to work that dough. And I'm not talking about a quick stir. We're talking about a solid 8 to 12 minutes of real physical kneading. All of that pushing and folding and stretching is what lines up those gluten proteins and turns the dough into that perfect stretchy structure.
And for quick breads, you do the exact opposite. The rule is gentle mixing only. Seriously, you often mix just until the dry ingredients are barely wet. A few lumps? Totally fine. Overmixing is the #1 mistake because every stir develops more of that gluten, which is the fastest way to ruin that tender, crumbly texture you're going for.
Okay, so let's just put this all side by side so it's super clear. For yeast breads, you use vigorous kneading. Your goal is to develop gluten, and the result is chewy and elastic.
For quick breads, you use gentle, minimal mixing. Your goal is to minimize gluten, and the result is tender and crumbly. See? The technique is a direct result of the goal.
All right, now that we've got the science down, let's talk about the delicious payoff. The world of yeast spreads is just so diverse and flavorful, and it's all built on that foundation of slow, patient fermentation.
I mean, you've got your classic kneaded doughs that give us loaves and rolls, but then you also have these wetter batter breads for things like ciabatta and French bread. The flavors can go anywhere from sweet to savory, and that slow fermentation can even create those really complex sour notes you get in a great sourdough.
And of course, the quick bread family is packed with all those comforting favorites we know and love. We're talking about moist banana bread, fluffy muffins, tender scones, and hey, even breakfast staples like pancakes and waffles owe their amazing texture to this fast-acting chemical science.
So if there's one thing you remember from all of this, let it be this. Your choice of leavening agent starts a chain reaction. It's decision that dictates everything else, whether you want to build up gluten or avoid it, which then tells you what mixing technique to use, and that technique is what ultimately gives you the final texture in your bread. It all starts with the rise.
So the next time you're in the kitchen, you'll know exactly what's going on inside that mixing bowl. Now that you're in on the science, the only real question left is, what are you in the mood for? The patient art of a yeast bread or the instant satisfaction of a quick bread? Happy baking!